Als van een oud verleden niets meer is overgebleven na de dood van de personen en na het vergaan van de dingen, dan blijven alleen, brozer maar levendiger, immaterieel maar duurzaam, bestendiger en trouwer, de geur en de smaak nog lang als dolende zielen hun leven voortleven. Herinneren, wachten, hopen en op de brokstukken van al het overige, in een bijna onwerkelijk klein druppeltje, weten zij het geweldige bouwwerk van de herinnering volkomen intact tot ons te brengen.
Okay, thank you for taking part in our experiment. It's been suggested that a smell can help you retrieve details about an event. So I'm going to give you the smell of disinfectant. So if you could sniff at this, and what's the first memory that you can tell me about?
I remember well, when I had my navel pierced, it took a really long time to heal, so I had to use betadine solution, which is a disinfectant, to keep the piercing clean.
Marcel Proust is famous for odor-cued memories because Proustian phenomena take their name from a very famous experience that he wrote about in his multi-volume novel, The Remembrance of Times Past. And in the early volumes of that novel, he writes about sitting in his mother's kitchen one day and feeling very depressed and very lonely. And his mother gave him a cup of plain tea and a little madeleine pastry to eat. And he dipped the pastry into the tea, and the smell and taste of the tea and the soaked pastry brought forth these wonderful, warm memories of a loving childhood and a warm home and a safe and secure environment. And these memories were very, very vivid and very emotional to him. And they proved to be an inspiration because from that moment he was inspired to write an enormous novel, and it almost changed his life from that one single experience. And this is a very famous anecdote, but no one had really tried to see whether or not these kinds of effects could actually happen with odours. And although it had been written about many, many times, there was very little empirical evidence to show that odours could actually bring forth vivid and emotional memories. And this whole question fascinated me and first prompted me to investigate the kinds of odor-cued memories that he talked about.
On the floating shipless oceans, I did all my best to smile.
The sense of smell is often represented as something really mysterious. It has been called the fallen angel of the senses. I think the sense of smell has missed out in terms of research and academic interest because it's always been held to be a lower sense, something more connected with animals than with humans. But the more we know about the sense of smell, the more we know that this is not the case. It's a very important sense for humans, and its importance comes from its role in emotion and motivation, from what we are now beginning to understand as the non-verbal parts of our behavior. If we look at the top of the nose, right in the top chamber, there are the olfactory receptors located here. And the olfactory receptors then track into the brain, into a complex area of the midbrain called the limbic system. It's very low down in our brains, and on top of that we've developed all these intellectual properties, and we tend to think that these are more important, but we are often driven by our sense of smell. It drives our emotions, it drives our feelings, and these can be the most important thing.
Now, given that memory, I'd like you to rate that memory in terms of the 7 rating scales that you see in there.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to give you a third word now. And again, I'd like you to do exactly the same thing.
Okay.
Okay. and the word is talcum. Talcum powder.
Talcum? Talcum. Talcum powder reminds me of when I was younger, and staying with my grandparents, because my grandmother would use talcum powder all the time. So I remember the smell of talcum powder, just being near her and smelling talcum powder.
Memories can be cued or triggered by pretty much anything. And that's because when you experience an event, when you experience an episode, not only do you encode or remember the things about that episode, but you also implicitly encode all the things that happen around it, which is what we call a context. So you remember what time it is, what place you're in, what the room looks like, how you felt at the time, who was involved, various other facets of the experience like that. And any of those can trigger a memory. So if you happen to be in the same place, you might spontaneously remember what happened the last time you were there. Not just without you even trying to retrieve that memory, it just pops into your head. So memories can be triggered by pretty much anything that is involved in the previous event. Now, it's been suggested that a smell can help retrieve additional details from autobiographical memories. So, given this smell, sniff at that and
Thank you.
tell me any more details that come to mind about that particular event that you've just told me about.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I did have a bit of a sore throat at the time, actually. It always seems to make it worse when you can smell cigarette smoke. And obviously the room was filled with cigarette smoke. I also bought a new jacket at the time, and I can remember worrying about it because it was on like a hook hanging down, and there was a lot of people with cigarettes, and I was worried that they might actually brush the coat with a cigarette and burn it. Yeah, is that any good?
Mm-hmm.
I'll take it. You know, it's quite cold in there as well. I think the smell of the cigarette and the actual temperature of the room was making my throat worse again.
I think odors are very special in the way they have access to memories, in that, from the example of Marcel Proust, the kinds of memories he retrieved in relation to the odors he experienced were very, very vivid and emotional. And I tried to study this by conducting some experiments using odors and asking people to retrieve memories. And I started off by using the standard autobiographical memory retrieval techniques with using cue words. So I presented people with words and asked them to retrieve a memory which they associated with it. And then I compared conditions where people then tried to retrieve the same memory, either with the same smell as the word, or a different smell, or a picture of the word, or just the word again. And my studies have shown that not only are memories from odors much more vivid and emotional, but they're also more detailed. You actually get much more actual bits of detail about the original event than you do with any other type of cue.
In Philadelphia doet psychologe Rachel Herz eveneens onderzoek naar het Proust Fenomeen. Maar haar conclusies wijken af van die van Simon Chu.
Okay, so I just want you to sit down and have a seat right here. And I'm just going to explain the experiment to you, and then when we're ready to go, you'll start to turn over these sheets. Well, I was interested in the fact that people keep saying that odors are the best cues to memory, and I think this comes out of anecdote and literature, and particularly Marcel Proust is known to most people about how odors have this extreme evocative quality, and they seem to be better than other kinds of sensory cues. What I did to investigate this was to compare odors with cues perceived through other sensory modalities for their ability to elicit memory. Now for the next set of paintings, I'm going to tell you a word I want you to think about while you're looking at the painting. Peppermint. 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 So what I did, I had people smell odors, I had people see objects, I had people feel objects and hear words, and paired with these painting images, and later on tested their memory for them, for their accuracy, their ability to correctly get the right picture with the cue, and also how they felt in the memory. Okay. And what I found across several experiments is that the accuracy of memory does not vary as a function of the cue type. But then what I also did is I look at how emotionally people respond, the same kind of comparison, how many emotions are evoked to the cue, what the intensity is, and how the emotion of the memory is. And what I found is that the odor-associated memories trigger the most emotion during recall. And what I think this means is that subjectively people have a much more impactful emotional experience when they're recalling a memory to an odor. And that feeling makes them believe that the memory must somehow be more real and true, when in actual fact what usually we mean by accuracy, the true ability to remember the correct details, is not any better with odors than it is with touch or with sight or verbal cues.
I have problems with the way Rachel Herz carried out her experiments, because Proustian phenomena are essentially phenomena which involve naturally occurring autobiographical memories. Now, Rachel Herz asked people to actively pair an odor and a stimulus. So she had an odor, and people were actually trying to remember the odor with the picture that they're meant to be pairing it with. Now, that's a good way of studying memory in general, but autobiographical memories are very different, because people don't walk around trying to memorize everything. They don't walk around trying to actively match a context and an event. And if they're actually trying to do this, then the kind of memory you get is very, very different from the kind of memory you get if you just walk around experiencing things without actually trying to memorize them.
Now, I did in fact start my PhD research myself with looking at the naturalistic phenomena, having people come into the lab, smell a whole series of different odors, and tell me what kind of memory is this evoking, if any. And even from those descriptive studies, I found that there was a fair bit of emotionality in the memories evoked to these odors. And more recently, you may not have seen this paper, I've done the same thing, comparing people's naturalistic ability to come up with memories with abstract visual, abstract music, and abstract odors. I found that people's memories to the odors were more emotionally intense, especially as measured by heart rate. So I do think that although my experiments have only sort of given a version of the real world, I think that they correlate with what happens in the real world, and that I have other experiments which support that.
I will happily agree with Rachel Herz when she says that memories are more emotional when cued by odors. I have found the same thing myself. But I think that the most interesting and fascinating part about Proustian phenomena in general is that they have a reputation for being actually more detailed, more vivid, and that you actually retrieve more details about the original event. And I don't think her experiments actually get to the heart of this problem.
Recording cortical EEG, that's electrical activity of the brain from the surface of the brain. Mainly language. I think this subject was trying to identify the smells, which is unusual. Showing predominantly left hemisphere, so they're doing a lot of trying to guess what the smell is. You would expect to see more emotional response coming from the right side of the brain. If we see activity coming on the left side of the brain, that's more related to speech. This is what we were saying about the speech activity, language activity being on the left side of the brain. What we are seeing with the sort of experiments we've been carrying out here at Warwick is that the highest centres of the brain are processing the information about smells. Previously they thought it was just an animal instinct, so therefore the brain processing wouldn't be carried out at the highest levels on olfactory stimuli. But we know that's not the case now, and we can see the frontal areas of the brain controlling what's happening and processing information about smell coming through. What we're looking at though here is billions and billions of cells all contributing, so there's a lot of noise in the system. It's a very, very noisy system, and we're trying to sort of tweak out the signals.
Aan geuren worden de meest wonderbaarlijke krachten toegedicht. Het wetenschappelijk bewijs daarvoor is vaker niet dan wel voorhanden. Maar dat geuren ons gedrag kunnen beïnvloeden, vaak zonder dat we daar zelf erg in hebben, is een ding dat zeker is.
This experiment was to look at how odors could become conditioned to emotional states and whether or not they could then have an influence on behavior. So the idea is that after having an initial experience with an odor under certain circumstances, in a totally different situation, the smell of that odor can precipitate, potentially, this is what the experiment was about, the same mood, and then that mood has an influence on what the person does in this second experience with the odor or third experience and so forth. And you can see here in this experiment, the emotion that was being manipulated was failure and frustration. Because in fact, there is no way for this maze to be solved. So she's not going to be able to get to the center without crossing one of these lines, and she's not going to win the toy prize that she wants.
Just put them in, that's perfect, right there is great. Okay, thank you very much.
Now she's brought to another room that's about exactly the same size, but this room is either scented with a different odor from the first one, the same odor, or not scented at all. And right now what she's given is a test to do. And so this was some kind of a cognitive test, and we were predicting that if the odor was the same and had the child experienced frustration, failure, in the first instance, smelling that odor would make them feel bad and frustrated and like they couldn't do well at intellectual kinds of tasks, and that she would do worse than had she experienced, in this case, a different odor or no odor. Children who were in her group, that is, had the same odor at both sessions, did significantly poorer on this task than children who had either a different odor at this session or no odor at this session. And the children in the no odor and different groups didn't vary.
Okay, good job.
I think this has strong implications for children's ability to perform in school, and how their performance, which could be mediated by how they feel about themselves, feelings of failure and low self-esteem, can in fact be changed by, for instance, a positive odor. We haven't done this kind of experiment, but an odor which is paired with feeling very good about yourself and very accomplished could potentially reverse behavior such as this, such that children would in fact perform much better than they would have originally.
In the gloria, in the gloria, hippity-peep, hoera! Hippity-peep, hoera! Ja, joh, jij mag een wens doen. Kan je dat wel ruiken? Ik ruik al citroen. Koud? Ja. Heb je er alleen?
Why is it difficult for people to name and describe odors? It is because of the location of the brain processing for olfaction in the midbrain. If we are to describe, name an odour, we must get that information from the midbrain up onto the outer cortex of our left hemispheres.
Knoflook. Citroen.
We've shown from our studies that certain areas of the cortex are important for the sense of smell, but there's no one spot where you can say, that's the sense of smell. It means that together with our lack of education about the sense of smell, because how many people teach the children about smells? How many people try to describe and analyze smells? Very, very, very few. So the implications are that we're extremely poor in our descriptions and labeling of smells. You might say, well, why is it important to label smells? In a sense, it isn't. You can listen to music without understanding music and enjoy it. But the understanding of music, as with the understanding of the sense of smell, the more you understand, probably the more you will enjoy it, and certainly the more you will notice these things. And then life will be a lot more fun, olfactorily speaking.
I think smells are very effective in retrieving especially old memories because of the way smells and how you learn to associate smells develops. Now, it's a strange facet of smells in that they don't tend to interfere with each other. When you first associate a smell with an event, the first association tends to last a lot longer than subsequent associations. So if you later on you have another event with the same smell, the first one is going to be remembered a lot more than the subsequent one, because the subsequent ones tend to be interfered with the original ones, but the original ones don't tend to suffer any interference from subsequent ones. So the earliest memories associated with smells tend to be a lot clearer. And this is why I think odor-cued memories tend to come quite early on in life, because it's the first experience of an odor and an event, and those two being paired together tends to make that particular memory quite strong.
The key thing for an odor to be a good contextual reminder is that it's novel and or distinctive, so that it somehow is unusual with respect to the context that it's in, and then stands out as a way of being able to bring the person back to that environment. And it would be the case, too, that something visual or auditory could bring you back if it were as uniquely isolated. But more often we're exposed to the same visual cues in many different contexts, and then they don't become effective as reminders.
Science has, by and large, ignored olfaction and instead has seemed to focus on how we see and how we hear, but hasn't really examined the effects of smells on our moods and our behavior. I think it's very important that we try and understand how smells affect us, because smell is the one sense that we can't really avoid. I mean, we can close our eyes and we can close our ears, but we can't, if we breathe, we have to smell. And until we understand how smells affect us, I think smell will still remain a mysterious entity.